So welcome everyone to the launch of the advanced copy of the UNEP Supermarket Food Packaging and Alternative Report. We are very excited to be here today, and we have before I go into introducing all the speakers that we have lined up today, just a quick word on the fact that we are hosted today by the platform that is hosting this event is the 13th International Conference on Life Cycle Assessment of Food that is taking place from today for the next couple of days in Lima, Peru. So thank you so much for the organizers of the Food LCA conference for making this possible. Just few, you might all be familiar by now to interact with Zoom, and actually we won't have a question and answer box at the moment for this event, but you will be able to raise your hands or ask your questions in the chat box directly. As you might have heard when you joined, this event is being recorded, and the recording and copy of the presentation will be shared with all of you after the event, and we will also upload it on the website of the Life Cycle Initiative if you'd like to check it afterwards. Just to go through briefly on what we'll be talking about and looking at today. So there will be a small welcome and introduction. We will pass to the release of the advanced copy of the report. Then we will talk about what are the key findings and of the report, and talk through some of what are the main highlights from some case studies that have looked at the marine impacts in the life cycle assessments that have been considered in the report. We will try to have Q&A sessions basically after each two interventions that will be that are planned for the event. And we'll continue with some example of the reuse and return systems, and then again a Q&A session before we close the event. We have a very exciting panel of speakers. Just briefly for myself, I'm Claudia Giacovelli, and nice meeting you all. I'm a program officer at UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. I'm part of the economy division, and I'm based in Paris, in France. So I'm connected from France today, and I'm part of the life cycle unit of UNEP. Today with us, we will have also Federica Pesce, associate expert from United Nations Environment Program. She's connecting from Cambridge, the UK. We will have also Ele Chang, environmental program specialist from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, connecting from Washington, DC. We will have Philippa Notten, LCA specialist from TGA Think Space in South Africa. Elena Correla Puertes, she's a postdoc researcher, and she's actually currently present physically in Lima, Peru. So she will be also our host for the people that are joining the event in person. The event is a hybrid, so there will be people connected online and some people in the room in Lima, Peru, and Elena is kindly also our host there. And then we will we also have, as part of our speakers today, Clemence Schmidt, the Commercial Executive Vice President of Loop Global, that will explain to us some of the example from the reuse and returnable systems that have been put in place so far, and that have that are proving to be successful. So from my side, what I would like to start sharing with you is really just a brief introduction in terms of how does life cycle thinking links to the agenda for sustainable development. It's been lately we are really seeing how the demand for life cycle assessment, life cycle thinking and approaches is really becoming high on the agenda of member states. Member states for us is really governments, really. So member states is a jargon for the UN, but when we talk about them, it's really we are really speaking of governments. And there was even a resolution when countries were during UNEA, which is basically the United Nations Environment Assembly, resolved together to encourage all countries to promote life cycle approaches. And this was a resolution 2/8 that was already signed in 2016. And in particular, when we look at SDG 12, we really see that already there is mention of the importance of paying attention to the life cycle of products and services. So particularly the SDG 12.4 states that by 2020, achieve the environmentally sound management of chemical and all waste throughout their life cycle. Now, 2020 is past. We are not quite yet there, so there is a long way to go. But the ambition and the objective was already there, and that highlight the importance of life cycle and the life cycle community. I've mentioned that I'm part of the Life Cycle Initiative. The Life Cycle Initiative is an initiative hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme. It's a public-private partnership that enables and promotes the use of credible life cycle knowledge by public and private decision makers. It really aims to provide a forum to ensure that science-based and consensus building processes are based on life cycle thinking to promote, to make sure that policies that are developed are science-based. So today we are launching the advanced copy of the Supermarket Food Packaging Report, and many thanks for all of you connecting from all over the world to this event. What drove us to really look at this subject is dates back to 2019. Even earlier, there has been really a big momentum starting from even before 2015, really, where we start looking at and comparing single-use plastic products versus what are the single-use alternatives or reusable alternatives, try to understand what are the better environmentally sound alternatives, really. So in UNEP, we started to collect information and propose recommendations to address single-use plastic product pollution based on a demand that we received from countries in March 2019. So we have gone on and looked at life cycle assessment studies and developed recommendations. So meta-analysis for several single-use plastic products, comparing them with single-use and reusable alternatives. We have looked at shopping bags, we have looked at beverage bottles, takeaway packaging, food packaging, caps, tableware, nappies, menstrual products, face masks. So this year we have released the LCA meta studies on face mask, and today we are very excited to launch and share with you the advanced finding of the food packaging report, supermarket food packaging report. All of these resources are available for a free download on the Life Cycle Initiative website and the UNEP document repository. And the link is here in the slides, which we will share at the end of the event. The idea is really that we wanted to understand what are the key drivers for using single-use food packaging versus alternatives, and what are the key considerations really that policymakers or life cycle assessment practitioners should take into account when for the practitioners when developing these studies, and for the policymakers how to read and interpret the science that is coming through in these studies. So when we have looked at all of these different single-use plastic products, what type of conclusion can we draw that are somehow cross-cutting and that could apply to all of them? First of all, and we are looking very high level here, but what we realized is that it is really the single-use nature of the product that is the most problematic for the planet, more so than the material that these products are made of. And as we have just coming out, or not quite yet, we hope to, but since the pandemic, we have really, what is very important to remember, because we have seen a big outgrow of single-use plastic products, from the face masks but to anything really, because it was perceived single-use products, plastic products were perceived to be more hygienic, for example. What we have found in reality is that it is really the way we use the product and not so much the product themselves that guarantees the safety. Another finding that we could apply cross-cutting over all these products that we have studied is the fact that cleverly designed products should be durable, and normally the lighter the product weight, the lower its environmental impact. So what we try to do is to really encourage governments to promote action that try to encourage them to keep resources at the highest value in the economy, and that is normally done through replacing single-use plastic products with reusable products. That says, we are aware that there is no single solution, there is no one-size-fits-all to address plastic pollution, and the measures are really country and context specific, but already by taking a life cycle approach, we are on the right path to taking the right decision. So in terms of where are we going to end plastic pollution? So there is a big drive at the moment, actually. So there is no one size fits all to address plastic pollution, but the world is really coming together because this has become one of the most urgent type of pollution that government have decided to act on, along with air and soil pollution, etc. The plastic pollution is one of the first where governments have really decided to come together to end plastic pollution. The United Nations Environment Assembly in this year, where all environment ministry from all over the world gathered together, have decided, and there was an incredible success for multilateralism, have decided and have resolved that they want to develop an international legally binding agreement by 2024, so in 2 years, on plastic pollution, addressing the full life cycle of plastic. So that was a great also success from life cycle perspective, because that would be the first internationally legally binding agreement that considers that as the approach. And for that, I mean the life cycle. So UNEP has already started working. We got the mandate from governments, and we have convened already a preparatory meeting in May this year, where the rules and procedures on how to go about negotiating these legally binding agreements have been discussed. And there will be the way the agreement will be negotiated at the global level is through an intergovernmental negotiating committee, the INC. This is normally the process that is used to discuss and negotiate international legal instruments. So we are starting the work actually in November. The first INC meeting will take place in November. And the ambition is that within 2 years, which is record time, within 2 years, they would sign a legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution. At the end, there will be a diplomatic conference of plenipotentiaries, upon which the negotiation will be completed and the instrument will be adopted and signed. So I won't go into the details of what the instrument will cover, but these are basically the high-level topics that there will be. And there is an element that I just will highlight, which is the last bullets, really, that is about the fact that one innovative aspect is that government have realized that actually plastic is such an important topic for so many different stakeholders along the value chain that they want to put in place a multi-stakeholder action agenda to try and incorporate the voices of those people and groups that won't necessarily participate in the negotiations of the agreement, but they will be impacted by the decisions that will be taken in the agreement, and therefore they want to engage with them in a more regular and structured way. So as part of that, here you will see, as part of this point of the multi-stakeholder engagement, on the 26th of November, we are organizing a multi-stakeholder forum, and I will ask my colleague to kindly post the link in the chat. If you are interested in following these discussions, you are welcome to register. And the multi-stakeholder forum will be in conjunction with the first INC that is taking place on the week of 28th of November. And you will be welcome to join. The first INC takes place in Uruguay. And then, as you can see from this timeline, we will have 2 INC for the next 2 years until December 2024, where we hope that the negotiation will come to a close and we will have an agreement. With that, I want to thank you all very much for this first part. But as you know, what we are here for is really to speak about the interconnectedness of supermarket food packaging. So, of course, the plastic aspect related to the packaging, but also there is a strong component. Whenever we have to draw conclusion on the plastic for the food, we need to look also at food systems in itself. For that, let me pass the floor. I will ask my colleague Federica Pesce to put on the camera, as I don't see yet, but Federica is the Associate Expert, Sustainable Food System in UNEP. And I will stop sharing also on my screen. Federica is, as I was saying earlier, Federica is based at the UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre in Cambridge, UK. And she supports UNEP effort in leading the transformation towards sustainable food systems. Over to you, Federica.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Claudia, for a very nice introduction and for also inviting me to be here today. I would like to start with a personal anecdote. So I was born and raised in a very small village in the northeast of Italy, and my family has been always accustomed to purchase their essential foods from the local market. So you can imagine my big surprise and quite shock when I first arrived in the UK. I'm currently based in Cambridge, as Claudia said, and I saw that here in supermarkets, even the bananas are wrapped in multiple layers of single-use plastics. So I'm personally very, very happy to see how UNEP and partners have come together to produce such an insightful and very timely, I would say, LCA meta-analysis on supermarket food packaging. So as many of you might recall, exactly 1 year ago, the UN Secretary General convened the first ever Food System Summit. The summit, which took place in September 2021, and in which UNEP played a very, very significant role, represented, I would say, a turning point in how food systems are being addressed by countries and business alike. We had more than 130 food system dialogues happening all around the world, and more than 100 countries committed to new and transformational pathways at head of state level. Now, that was the end of 2021, but we all know how the beginning of 2022 looked like. Unfortunately, the Ukraine crisis has pushed many countries that were already weakened by COVID and the climate crisis further into food insecurity, which was mainly due to soaring food, energy, and fertilizer prices. These geopolitical situations are increasing the volatility and the stress on already severely depleted and stretched food systems. And as if it was not enough, unprecedented extreme weather events across the world are continuing to push the food system, our food system, to a breaking point. So we consider the fact that the world right now is at a crossroad, and we have a choice. There are two distinct pathways that we can take right now. Either we follow the business as usual scenario by increasing our investment in fertilizer production and current patterns of grain production, or we decide to pursue the pathways that were laid out by the Food System Summit last year that would lead us towards a more resilient and diverse food system that is less dependent on just a few commodities and delivers on the outcomes for the planet and for the people, including on health, nutrition, and livelihoods. So at UNEP, we recognize that a solution must lie in a mixture of both pathways. On one hand, we need to increase the resilience and sustainability in critical commodity value chains. And on the other, we need also to increase the ownership by countries and other stakeholders of their impacts on food systems. This is why, in this moment, we are currently reviewing within UNEP our food system strategy. And we would like to further contribute to increase resilience and transformative change in global and national food systems. To this end, we would like to work together because, as Claudia just mentioned, collaboration is fundamental for UNEP. We'd like to collaborate with countries, businesses, and communities in order to catalyze collective actions to deliver, first of all, agricultural and commodity systems that restore and regenerate rather than degrade land, soils, and biodiversity. Secondly, supply chains and consumption patterns that are waste-free and driven by healthy and sustainable diets considerations. And thirdly, the enabling conditions for a just transition of our food system through integrated governance and policies from governments at all scales and agribusinesses and the financial institutions. So I believe that the conversations that we are going to have today is part of this transformative change that we would like to bring about within UNEP as a sort of a follow-up to the UN Food System Summit. And I'm looking forward to our discussions today. So thank you very much again. And Claudia, back to you.
Thank you, Federica. Thank you so much. And I understand perhaps my line not very clear before. So I'm putting my headset, hoping that the line will be better. And thank you so much. So that's excellent. And the connection, and I've mentioned that we will take some, if there are any questions on the UNEP approach to plastic, on how the global scene is shaping up for around the plastic agenda, or if you have any question to Federica around the approach of UNEP to the food systems in general, please send them through in the chat. We'll be happy to answer. You can also, we'll have an opportunity now. If some questions for us will come also later, we'll be happy to answer also later. As I don't see any questions popping up for now in the chat, I think we will continue, and I will happily then move to the moment that we have been waiting and connected for. It's really about the release of our report. This report is a collaboration with, and I would like to share again my screen. Please bear with me. Just 1 second. The report is a collaboration. It's kindly funded by the USEPA, so the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and it's really about drawing recommendation both for policymakers and for businesses regarding the packaging of supermarkets or retail food. I would like to invite also, wow, that's an unveiling.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite Elle Chang to join me to basically have this launch of the supermarket food packaging. It was really conceptualized together, and we had a very intense engagement with experts to discuss and workshop the approach and the methodology that we have used for the supermarket food packaging LCA meta study, and Pippa will take us through that also in a moment. But Elle, let me pass it over to you. Elle is an international environmental program specialist in the Office of the International and Tribal Affairs at the US EPA in Washington, D.C., as I was mentioning earlier. And her focus of work is on food waste, sustainable food system, international plastic pollution, waste management solution. And she collaborates on these issues with partners throughout various fora. And I could go on with the bio from Elle, but let me hand it over to you, Elle. And thank you so much for the support and the partnership that we had through this work.
Thank you so much, Claudia. That was a really cool unveiling graphic that we just saw. On behalf of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, I really wanted to extend a warm thanks to UNEP and to Claudia, and especially her team within the Life Cycle Group, along with those at TGH Think Space, who really steered this report to fully come to life over the past year. My dogs just decided to want to leave the room, but the door is closed. Doesn't want to hear my speech, apparently. My name is Ellie Chang, and I work in the international office, as Claudia said, at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm just really excited to be here with you all this morning. I really can't think of a more appropriate venue or audience to be soft launching this report with today. And on a more personal note, over the past 2.5 years of the global pandemic, I've spent a lot of time at the grocery store. It's not only a place where I find my creative energy as someone who really likes to cook and experiment with food, but it's also one of the few places where I found I could go to escape my house during the pandemic. And for the most part, grocery stores in my part of DC, it's a huge nightmare for someone who gets really frazzled thinking about all of the overpackaging and single-use plastic packaging of nearly every single product that comes home with me. As Frederica said, bananas coming in plastic wrap. Why do we need that? Bananas are already wrapped. And so my decision to buy products at the supermarket is often influenced by whether I'm able to avoid the single-use packaging or whether I'm able to recycle or reuse the packaging. But simply bringing one's own bag to the supermarket really never feels like enough, and it isn't. And for these reasons, I'm personally really excited to see this meta-analysis on supermarket food packaging come to life and to offer recommendations for alternatives to single-use plastic packaging. As Claudia mentioned earlier, this report is the 9th in a series of reports that provide insights from life cycle assessments to make more informed policy decisions around single-use plastic products and their alternatives. So I really hope that everyone will have a chance to take a look at those other reports in this important series. At the US EPA, we're expanding our efforts around circularity, and we're thinking about energy, material management, and water efficiency. And we're learning that many countries have really important lessons to share, even if they've never branded these efforts as being circular. Our circular economy vision begins with designing products to be more sustainable, maximizing reuse and recycling, and also minimizing the impacts of waste management at the end of life. Last year, the US released our National Recycling Strategy, which is the first part of a series of strategies about building a more circular economy for all. And in our National Recycling Strategy, we identified 5 key objectives to addressing these challenges, which really align with those recommendations that were made in the report that we're releasing today. And those include improving markets for recycled commodities, increasing collection and improving materials management and infrastructure, reducing contamination in the recycled materials stream, enhancing policies and programs to support circularity, and also standardizing measurement and increasing data collection. We're currently planning to develop additional strategies that will address plastics, food and organic waste, electronics, critical minerals, textiles, and also building materials. And across multiple levels of governance, as well as the private sector, the US is also working towards encouraging circularity in diverse ways, such as public procurement, consumer education, partnership programs, technical assistance, R&D, enhancing enabling environments, and also supporting trade policies and voluntary market-based incentive programs. And encouraging better enabling environment starts with listening to what the private sector needs and using convening powers of government to understand those needs while remaining focused on science-based targets. The US also supports research on extended producer responsibility, and a lot of this work is being done by the OECD Working Party on Resource Productivity and Waste. And at the federal level, the US encourages voluntary circular economy approaches, while US states and local municipalities sometimes pursue more regulatory options in areas like mandatory extended producer responsibility. While the US has a national recycling goal to increase recycling by 50% by 2030, we also have a national goal to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. The US EPA is also developing a new goal to reduce climate impacts from production, consumption, use, and disposal of materials more broadly. So this report will be incredibly informative as EPA seeks to use our understanding of life cycle impacts of materials to set goals related to reducing material impacts. And finally, dialogue and information sharing between countries at the private-public interface will be critical, which is why I think the timing of this launch couldn't be more perfect as countries prepare to forge an international, legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution. The relevance about understanding the full life cycle implications of alternatives to single-use plastic products will undoubtedly be at the heart of these upcoming discussions. I really look forward to learning more about the key findings and case studies, and also, again, want to give a huge thanks to UNEP and TGH ThinkSpace for making this report possible and for bringing us here together today. Thank you so much. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you very much, Hélène. It's great. Thank you also for sharing the vision of the US going forward and the very ambitious targets that they have been set. And indeed, it's quite exciting to see how fast moving the plastic agenda is moving on the global scale. And I'm very much looking forward to see also how this conversation, these findings, and this life cycle science really can inform the discussions that will start happening in Uruguay in November, and then will continue until 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I would like to pass to the floor to Pippa Noten. Philippa, so Pippa Noten is the director of TGH ThinkSpace, with whom we have partnered to develop as a technical partner for the development of this report. Pippa is she has a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and she has worked since then as a consultant in the US, in Denmark, in South Africa, and she is an internationally renowned LCA expert, and with whom I have had the pleasure to work with in several occasions since at UNEP, and she's also one of the lead authors of this report. So she will be taking us through the main findings and recommendations that have come out of this report, also helping us to understand what is the methodology that we used, and really just provide a brief overview of this life cycle assessment meta-analysis. Thank you so much, Pippa, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some sneak highlights, let's say a sneak peek into the report. And I really hope this encourages everyone to go and download it and to read the full report for yourself. So, and thank you. As Claudia mentioned, I'm one of the authors, just to recognize my co-authors, Yvonne Lewis and Matthew Burke, also at TGH. And then also well, Eleanor is going to speak on the Marilka part. So we also had co-authors. It was a partnership with the UNEP LCA project. And then really also to acknowledge, Claudia mentioned a workshop we had at the start of the project. So all those that contributed to that, especially contributed studies, insights into where we should be looking for the literature, and also to our reviewers. So thank you to the reviewers who really put valuable insights into this report, and they're all listed in the report. So to start with a bit of context, so globally, I think, packaging, as we heard, supermarkets abound with single-use plastic packaging, and packaging accounts for over 30% of total plastic use. And it really dominates all other materials to a considerable degree, as you can just see if you stroll down a supermarket aisle. It also makes a disproportionate percentage of global plastic waste, and even more so of plastic leaked to the ocean. And so, our reality really is that recycling rates are far below what they need to be. Only 9% of plastic ever recycled, less than 1% has been recycled more than once. So we're really very far from our circular aspirations. And this is particularly true for food packaging, since the particularly problematic plastics that are on the slide, those are highlighted by Ellen MacArthur Foundation's New Plastics Economy report. These are particularly prevalent in supermarket food packaging. So, so plastics are a problem, but we can really isolate that down quite significantly to food packaging as a big contributor to our plastics problem. So life cycle assessment, as this is very much just to put in the context of a meta-analysis. So the idea behind this study and all the others mentioned in the series is to look at the rich life cycle assessment literature. LCA has been particularly active on food packaging, as a topic area, and food packaging within that. So to look at that rich literature and see what can we deduce, by looking across all the numbers of studies that have been done. So it's very much a meta-analysis. And then, of course, what comes out is very much guided by what's out there in the literature. So there's no sort of new research. It's a synthesis. And why a life cycle assessment really? Well, I guess the strength of LCA, is its systems view. We're taking into account all the stages and processes involved in delivering that packaging service. So, including also the transit packaging normally in single-use packaged products. And then in the case of reusable packaging systems, really important is the return trips and any washing and maintenance processes. So life cycle assessment takes all of that into account. And even though it's not always done, LCA can address the packaging together with the food product that it's intended to deliver. The point of packaging is to get the food product to the consumer. And so we want to look at that whole system and ensure that the whole system is improved and not just the packaging. And that's really important. And that's a view that life cycle assessment gives you, or a well done life cycle assessment. And that said, of course, the LCA is not a perfect tool. And we got to interpret the results quite carefully within the context of where the limitations are, and also always remembering the wider environmental and social context. So a bit about our methodology for the meta-analysis. We started with a broad sweep of the literature, and then, as I mentioned, a workshop with stakeholders to really identify the literature out there, which was a lot. So of the very big amount, we managed to sort of get it down to sort of 95 articles that would be fully on the topic of life cycle assessment and supermarket food packaging. So taking out, there's loads on packaging, and there's been those other studies. So we weren't looking at reusable cups or grocery bags, so really isolating it down to just supermarket food packaging. We found about 95 articles and reports. And while our focus was on looking at the recent full LCA studies, importantly, that also considered alternatives. So we wanted a comparative element. So that's very much looking at single-use packaging and their alternatives. So we only included studies that had that comparative element to them. But of course, in our sweep, we came across a number of really good review articles on food waste and the intersection with packaging. So, we've included a lot of insights that aren't particularly just from the studies that we selected to include, but we have a very rich reference list in the report, which I hope you can and will go through. But in essence, we distilled those 95 studies down in the end to 33 studies, shown on this slide, really. And that was through some selection criteria, mainly around within the studies were within the last 10 years, that they were full. They looked at not just carbon footprints, but full LCA impacts, and importantly, full value chain, preferably also the food product, not always. And then of those sort of 33, we sort of, when we analyzed them, they fell into these four groups of what we call food archetypes. So namely refrigerated products, and within that, things like meat and bacon, very much, and dairy. And these were very much the single-use food products. There were no reusable or returnable food packaging options within this. So it was very much single-use packaging, looking at different materials, different ways of packaging fresh meat and dairy. The next category was fresh produce, which we broke down into prepared fruits and vegetables, so things that have been cut up and packaged, and then whole fruits and vegetables. And the important distinction there is that the whole produce, things like we've been talking about bananas already, so the bananas and potatoes, that those can be sold loose. So, by weight, preferably your reusable bag or a produce bag that you take at the store. Those are ones sold by weight. So we had that distinction, the loose packaged products, sort of the whole fruit and veg. And then the next group was pantry goods. So we further broke these down into shelf-stable goods. So these are things like bottled and canned products like olive oil and tuna fish. And then dry goods such as pasta and rice. And then there was also 4 articles that didn't really fit into any of these food products, because they looked at packaging films or barrier wraps that really have a relevance across the food archetype. So it could be around a meat product or around a vegetable product, or even making up a bag for rice. So it's really the material and not the food product. So there were 4 of those studies. Also, when we did our analysis, the 4 themes, which we called cross-cutting themes, fell out as we analyzed the LCA studies in depth. And these 4 themes were food waste, so especially a big topic within the meat products and dairy products, but also came a fair bit into veg produce and pantry goods. So food waste being a topic that often came in. Bio-based and biodegradable plastics, also a topic that came up quite a bit as being proposed as a solution to to conventional plastic packaging. Reusable and returnable packaging came up, not, as I said, hardly at all at one dairy study, milk bottles, but otherwise not much in the refrigerated, but certainly in the fresh produce, and especially in transit packaging. Reusable crates, or a number of studies on the fresh produce, and also in the pantry goods, we saw some reusable product studies, reusable packaging. And then our last theme, cross-cutting theme, was marine litter, somewhat different to the others, because it was more the lack of inclusion of marine impacts that's noted. There was only one study that had a marine pollution indicator included. So that's somewhat different to the others, and more lack. And we have a partnership within the study with Marilka and Eleanor. I won't go into that too much, because we have Eleanor speaking after me, who will give the findings of how we intersected our study with a bit of a deep, sort of an advance of what could be possibly done to address marine plastic litter impacts in food packaging. So without going into too much detail, I just wanted to, show within our report, we provide the findings and recommendations for each of the food archetypes that I quickly went through there, and then also for each of those 4 cross-cutting themes. So we've tried to make the report very much accessible in that you could dive in and just look at the food product that you're interested in or the cross-cutting theme, and they each have their own recommendations, of course, along with the main report recommendations. So there's that level, and this just gives sort of a summary of the findings at the different food archetype level. So yeah, hopefully this inspires you to go and look at the reports. I don't want to, read all this text in this table, but just on a high level, what we really saw was what fell out were there was food products where minimizing food waste is the priority issue. So through the packaging, it's really the idea is around packaging that prolongs shelf life, prolongs the food, reduces food waste. That is the most important issue. And that was especially for the meat products. Those are the products with very high environmental impacts in their production. So the most important thing is making sure that that food product gets to the consumer. And anything you can do with the packaging to ensure that is the best thing to be doing. The next class we found was where the food waste and the packaging materials are both important factors. So for these food products, often the dairies and some of the prepared foods, prepared meals, and packaged fruit, prepared fruit, it was almost equal between the packaging and the food product inside, depending on the food product. But there wasn't that strong dominance for the food product like in the meat products. So there, what you want to do is make sure that your packaging, you could be minimizing your packaging, but you really must be sure you're not doing that at the expense of the product inside. So there is a bit of a balancing act between the two. And then the third group was where we really found that packaging could be minimized or even avoided entirely, and where there's scope for returnable packaging or avoiding packaging altogether. And that was in the whole fruit. So we spoke a bit about loose purchasing. And the other place it comes in is in pantry goods. We found, there's a lot of over packaging that goes on with pantry goods. So things like bag and box, where you have the product already in a plastic bag, and then that goes in a box, which is largely, often just maybe for extra branding, extra height, a lot of excess packaging that really can be avoided without incurring food loss or environmental impact. So wherever you can avoid packaging, that is the best thing to do. So that is really the key message. Wherever the food type allows it, so wherever you don't increase food waste, food should be sold unpackaged or in reusable packaging, as this is almost always environmentally preferred to food in single-use packaging. The caveat there, of course, was the meat. So foods associated with high environmental impacts in their production, then you want the packaging design to prioritize minimization of food waste. And for foods associated with lower environmental impacts in their production, packaging should be minimized and eliminated wherever feasible. So trying to avoid that over packaging and reusable or returnable if at all possible. But you might, how do you tell where you are? So really a recommendation is that you really need the life cycle assessment view or the systems view that covers the full value chain and importantly includes the product losses in order to determine, whether you should be minimizing or avoiding or using returnable or recycling packaging. So there really is no hard and fast rule. It's a lot around context and the particular food product. So following from our number one recommendation there is our top policy recommendation, which is really around creating a level playing field for reusable packaging systems. So the current legislative environment really tends to favor single-use packaging. And so, a really important policy recommendation is to look at measures that can be implemented to level this, to put these on more on an equal footing, if not to provide a preference for reusable as we found such a strong environmental preference, but at least not to prejudice them, not to have them working against each other. So one is economic measures, things like, taxes on packaging waste, that could help remove market barriers for usable packaging. The second one is standards that address overpackaging and require better packaging design. So in that, I mean really design for recycling, designing packaging that's recycling, and also important having standards for recycled content. And then legislation such as extended producer responsibility that makes companies responsible for the end of life of their products that they put on the market. So EPR has been used quite successfully, certainly in countries across the world, and in Europe especially, where they typically have targets for recovery and recycling and sometimes also recycled content. And that's really been seen to increase the recovery or recycling of packaging. Importantly, though, not that many EPR legislation has measures for reuse, so reuse targets. So EPR has been less successful at stimulating reusable packaging systems, or stimulating reuse. So that's something to bear in mind. So, yeah, recommendations for reusable packaging. Really important to consider the whole packaging system, as I mentioned. So we need that systems view, life cycle assessment, because it's not always the case. So although it's our top finding is to promote wherever possible, it is within that context of wherever possible, and that's where very long transport distances, especially where you've got to return reusable packaging high distances, or where if they're really inefficient washing plants, or where the reusable packaging gets used only a few times, then there might well be a environmental preference for the single use. So it's really important to consider the whole packaging system. Another similar, coming from that also is it's better to have many distributed return plants rather than a single, because you want to avoid those long return distances. That's one of the main aspects where reusable packaging isn't competitive, is when you have very long return distances. Ways of managing so that you can have more distribution plants or washing plants is through standardization, because that facilitates pooling. So where a number of brands or companies can access the same facilities rather than each person having their own one, which obviously would tend to have one of needing to cover long distances if you can share. And that's been used very successfully in crates, reusable crates. And deposit return schemes is also facilitated through standardization, and that especially has been shown to drive reuse rates up. So that's the number one. So next to return distances, the other really important aspect to make reusable packaging environmentally preferable, or ensure that it's environmentally preferable, is to have a large number of uses. So that's where deposit return schemes can be very positive. And the last 2 points also just that, we can't rely on just the eco-minded consumers. It's really reusable food packaging systems have to be competitively priced, and that comes back to the legislative environment to some degree, but then also within brands. The other really important aspect is that it must be accessible and convenient to consumers. So it can't be harder, and that's also where it's sort of distributed. It must be, you may be able to return easily and accessibly. So I'm nearly out of time, so I'll just go quickly through the single-use packaging ones. Where we found single-use packaging to be competitive or have the lowest environmental impacts was where it had high recycled content and was itself recyclable. So in certain cases, especially for cardboard boxes or corrugate box, that is when it's competitive, if it's got high recycled content. And then the problem with many countries is recycled content isn't allowed in food grade food packaging, in food grade packaging. So that's it's sort of a legislative barrier that really needs to be addressed and is being addressed within the EU. As that, that's one way of really driving improvements within single-use packaging systems. Another just a point there, the second point is around, so if you do make changes to packaging, it's really important that those changes take the efficacy and the acceptability of by the consumer into account, because you really need to avoid anything that leads to potentially more food waste. So if you have a packaging where some of the food gets stuck in the packaging and you can't empty it out as nicely as the old design, even if that packaging itself is low impact, it doesn't really help if you've actually increased the food loss. So it's always within this context of making sure that you don't increase food loss. And the next point is to lead on to Eleanor, who's going to talk about the recommendations around our fourth cross-cutting theme, which was marine impact. So I won't go through that bullet point. That's a teaser.
Thank you so much, Pippa, this was excellent and very, very informative. And just to give a sense of the depth and the type of recommendation that we were able to draw, looking at such a vast amount of literature was not easy job, but I think what's going to be interesting for people when looking through the report is to be able to navigate the various findings and the way they are presented. And I think what came through in the report, but also from your presentation, is that at the end of the day, the main two considerations that we have been able to use to really analyze the various food packaging and what are the preferred options considering life cycle assessment results are really looking at the waste management context, and the way we have classified is really when in countries where on places where there is a poor waste management context versus a good waste management context. So where there is landfill, open dumping, or poor or no recycling versus places where there is a high recovery and recycling rates. And the other big consideration is really the willingness of consumers to, for example, change behavior related to purchasing and returning or recycling the package. So that is all presented in the report, and we have grouped, as Pippa mentioned, the presentation of these two considerations. We have mapped in matrices basically these two considerations and suggested what applies, what are the least environmentally impactful option in terms of packaging, depending on these two considerations for each of the food packaging that we have considered. Thank you very much. And I know that we are tight on time, so let me pass it over to Elena. And Elena is currently in Peru, Lima, in the room there in the Lima University. Elena is a PhD of chemical engineering from CIREG University in Canada. She's researches and she researches the fate and impacts of microplastic in the aquatic environments. She's also a member of Marilka, and she will tell us a bit more about that. But just in short, Marilka is an international scientific committee that develops LCA methodology for assessing the potential impact of plastic litter. Elena, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Claudia. If Silvana, you could share the screen, please. My presentation. So, as Claudia just introduced me, I am live in Lima, and I will be presenting the part of the marine litter impacts, which Pippa mentioned that are not currently covered by most life cycle case studies. So, I think. Perfect. So with this, we can start with the objectives of this part of this report, which were to investigate how LCA results would change if we were to include marine litter impacts, because currently they're mostly not included. So for this, we did two sub-objectives. The first one was to develop the methodology for quantifying the potential impacts of plastic litter, and the second one was to integrate these marine litter impacts into LCA studies. So we took 3 studies. The first one was single-use food trays for on-the-go meals, and these this study already included marine litter impacts, and we did it earlier this year with my team at CIREG. And then the other 2, which were single-use bags for fresh cut vegetables, as well as reusable crates for vegetable and fruit transportation, they originally did not include marine litter impacts, but we added them as part of this report. So with this, we move on to the methodology, which I will actually be presenting in detail tomorrow for the people participating in LCA Foods. So feel free to join tomorrow. But today, just as a brief introduction for the methodology, you could please pass the slide. And, yeah, thank you very much. So we looked first into the life cycle inventory, and for this we had to identify what were the sources of microplastic emissions. And we identified two main sources. The first one was primary microplastics at the production stage. So as plastic products are being produced, some pellets can leak into the environment. And this is what we call primary microplastics. But also later on, as the microplastics, so the big plastics, leak to the environment, they can break down into small plastics as well. So this would be a secondary source of microplastics. And in order to quantify them, we applied the Plastic Leak Project guidelines. So this is for the life cycle inventory. For the life cycle impact assessment, we had to develop characterization factors to quantify the potential impacts of marine microplastic emissions. And for this, we needed two sub-factors, effect factors and fate factors, which we could integrate into these characterization factors and ultimately apply them to the life cycle inventory to obtain the potential impacts of plastic emissions. However, there are some limitations to this methodology. And so we're only covering one category at this point, which would be microplastics. And we are covering only their physical effects on biohealth. So as the name says, this is just by the physical presence of these hard plastic particles that could be ingested by fish or other organisms. It could accumulate in the body, for example, in the guts, posing different health problems. But we are not covering macroplastics because the methodology is not developed far enough yet. But in the future, this will cover, for example, entanglement. The limitations of this methodology is that we're just covering one impact category for now, but it's an opportunity for later where more impact categories of marine litter will be covered. So, and when we also had a high uncertainty, for example, of the plastic degradation, how long does it take to degrade in the ocean and other parameters? So in the end, we decided to have best, medium, and worst case scenarios to cover all the possibilities. So let's jump into the results with the first case study. If you could, yeah, thank you very much. So the first case study was for a single-use food tray of on-the-go meals with a functional unit to carry one meal for one person in Montreal, Canada in 2021. And this is a cradle-to-grave LCA. And actually the materials that we're covering, they do overlap with materials for fresh produce and meat packaging. And this is why we decided to include this LCA study to this report. And we are comparing one single-use plastic, expanded polystyrene, and two compostable alternatives, bagasse, which is important to Canada, and wood pulp, which is locally made in Quebec. And expanded polystyrene is made in Canada, Ontario, Canada as well. So moving on to the results, we can see that actually the bagasse container on the left has the highest impacts in the overall on ecosystem quality. And these are linked with climate change mainly. And compared to the other compostable alternative, wood pulp, this performs much better, which is made in Quebec, where the energy is generated by hydropower. So this also lowers the climate change impacts. And it would be actually comparable to the expanded polystyrene container if we did not take into account the gray part. So the gray part is the one for the marine litter impacts or linked with microplastics. And in the best case scenario, this is the thin line. So it's visible, but it's small. But in the worst case scenario, this would be all the gray part. And the impacts would actually more than double the original overall impacts on ecosystem quality. So although there is a high uncertainty, this indicates that potentially marine litter could be relevant. With this, we move on to the next case study, which is a case study on single-use bags for fresh cut vegetables. And here the functional unit is to contain a 130-gram serving of fresh cut lettuce in Italy. This is also a cradle-to-grave LCA, but the marine litter impacts were not present in the original study, and we added them for the purpose of this UNEP report. And we are comparing polypropylene and polylactic acid, which is sometimes considered as a biodegradable polymer. So we wanted to compare the two of them. If we move to the results, we did a regionalization study in which we compared on the left, high-income countries, then upper middle-income countries, low-income countries, all the way to the right, the low-income countries. And here we can actually only see something for polypropylene because polylactic acid is several orders of magnitude smaller. And this is not linked with the fact that it's more degraded faster, but rather with the fact that it's much denser and will sink much faster to the sediments. So there's less likelihood that the fish will ingest the polylactic acid particles. And although the study was done in Italy, we wanted to have this regionalization to see if these lettuce bags were used in different regions of the world, what would be the chances that they would leak into the environment, and how would this affect the impacts from marine litter. And if we look into the worst case scenario, so the one on the right, we can then compare this to the other impact categories in the next slide. And here we can see on the left, both for polypropylene and polylactic acid, the light blue is climate change. So these are the largest impacts. And the other impacts are very small, so we get to zoom in. And this is what we can see on the right. And in purple, there are the impacts from microplastics in the marine environment. So actually for polypropylene, they're visible, and they are comparable to other impact categories of land occupation and land use in the same order of magnitude. Whereas for PLA, this is so small that it's not even visible on the graph. So here overall, we see that the plastic litter impacts do not have a very, very big amount on the overall impacts, but still they are in the order of magnitude of other impact categories. And finally, the last LCA study is the one of reusable crates for vegetable and fruit transportation with a functional unit of distributing over 6 million of packages of fruits and vegetable plastic crates or cardboard boxes in Spain. Again, we have a cradle-to-grave LCA to which we added the marine litter impacts. And we are comparing two reusable plastic options, which are polypropylene and high-density polyethylene, and one single-use cardboard box. For the results, we also did a regionalization study. And here we can see actually that in Spain, although it is comparable to the high-income countries, due to the waste management system, it's a bit lower. And we see the same trend that if you move on to the right, so for the low-income countries, the likelihood of the plastics to end up in the ocean is higher. So the impacts linked with marine plastic litter are higher. But in this case, for polypropylene and high-density polyethylene, due to the high uncertainty, we don't see a big difference. We cannot assess whether one is better than the other. And taking the worst-case scenario on the right, we can then integrate this as a worst-case situation to the original results from Abejón et al. In the next slide. And here we can see again that climate change impacts, which in this case are in light brown, are the most significant ones, whereas the ones of physical effects on biota, these are the ones of marine microplastic impacts, are not even visible on the graph because they are too small. So here we see that they affect the overall damage and ecosystem quality. The effect is negligible in this case. And with this, we move on to the key findings of this part of the report, which are, in the first place, that climate change impacts have the largest overall contribution to the damage and ecosystem quality, whereas marine microplastic litter impacts are several orders of magnitude smaller. And there's one exception, expanded polystyrene, where we saw that in the worst case scenario, the impacts were quite large and larger than the ones of climate change. The second point is that the fate of impacts of marine microplastic litter can vary depending on the type of plastic. So we saw that for expanded polystyrene, they were the most significant. For polylactic acid, they weren't even, well, they were quite negligible. And polypropylene and high-density polyethylene are somewhere in the middle. Then the next point regards the location of the plastic use and the end of life, because this can change the impacts up to 2 orders of magnitude. And this is linked with the waste management systems and the probability that plastic will leak to the environment. And finally, for the last point, we see that there's some indication that reusable plastics have low marine microplastic litter impacts. Although we did not have a case study that compared both single-use and reusable plastics, but we saw that for the case studies for single-use plastics, they were comparable to other impact categories, whereas the one for the reusable plastics, they were several orders of magnitude smaller. And from these key insights, we move to the recommendations. The first one being that packaging alternatives that seek to address marine plastic impacts should simultaneously address climate change impacts, or at least not to be at the expense of climate change impacts. And I think this is consistent with what Pipa told us earlier. Then the second recommendation is that reusable plastic packaging alternatives should be promoted over single-use plastic alternatives, as these are likely to have lower impacts. Of course, if they are reused properly, you would have to reuse them enough times. But this is in line, I think, with the conclusions that Pipa presented as well. And then the next point regards the plastic types. So with this information of the different plastic types will have different fates and impacts on the environment, this could weaken or strengthen the use of different types of plastics. However, there's still large uncertainty, and research is refining this to really quantify the impacts of different types of plastics. So thank you very much. With this, I finish my presentation. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Elena. That was very, very clear and very well said. It's great to hear also applause in the room. So that's the advantage of being in person. That's wonderful. Actually, I took questions from online, but let me check also if people in the room would like to ask any questions.
Is there any question in the room? No? No? No question in the room.
Okay, otherwise from my side, what I thought was very interesting of the work that has been done around trying to incorporate marine litter impacts in some of the LCA studies that we have assessed in the meta-analysis is also this idea of trying to see how those impacts could look like if we were to consider different income groups in terms of the regionalization that you have done in terms of impact of income groups. So, for example, one point that you drew there was the fact that for low-income countries, for example, how waste is managed. So the end-of-life stage is quite an important impact. So but the point there, it's really like the take-home message in my mind is also the fact, yes, waste management, how waste is managed, it's very important how the end of life is managed, but how do we prevent products to become waste in the first place? And that's the whole study and the whole research around reusability and the fact that we need to maximize and keeping product in the economy for the longest time possible at the highest value, really. So thank you so much for the collaboration that we had for this report. And Marilka is a group anyways that is associated with the Life Cycle Initiative. So we do work quite a lot together. We'll switch presentation and we'll pass directly then the floor to Clémence Schmidt to give us some examples of reuse and return systems. So Clémence is the Commercial Executive Vice President for Loop Global, working closely with Loop partners. And these are brand manufacturer, retailers to drive Loop expansion strategies and its market execution. Clémence, as part of the report of the UNEP LCA meta-analysis on supermarket food packaging, we have included some of the examples of actual products and packaging packaging solutions that Loop has put in place in the market in various continents by now. And we had some example also from Algramo, which is a company based in Chile. The whole idea is really to try and revolutionize the way we consume and the way we perceive the simplicity really that is linked to single-use plastic packaging, to try and shift our mindset to the fact that also refillable, reusable can be practical. So they have through Loop and to the example of Algramo, etc., they have really been able to put such a system that is practical for consumers in place. So we'll be hearing directly from Clémence Schmidt. Thank you so much for joining us, Clémence.
No, thank you, Claudia. Thank you for having me and for giving me the opportunity to present what Loop does. So just maybe to start in grounding everyone, we belong to a company which is a mission-driven company, TerraCycle, has been around for 20 years to eliminate the idea of waste. So not just waste itself, but this concept that is a purely human concept of creating things that we afterwards don't use and that don't either biodegrade or can be reused in any shape or form by any other organism in this planet. Loop is our third division. It really focuses on tackling the root cause of waste as opposed to the symptoms on recycling by tackling disposability. So it is a reusable deposit model. And the other good news is we are not trying to reinvent the wheel. This is actually how, in the past, almost everything used to function. The packaging was an asset from the manufacturer. At that time, that manufacturer wasn't motivated by environmental concerns or pollutions or CO2 emission, but was financially motivated to make the best use possible of this asset. So the more you use it, the longer you keep it, the lower the cost per fill became. When we move in the modern consumption in the 50s, with single use becoming the norm, it brought to our society a lot of benefit from convenience and affordability. And this is what you can see here celebrated on that picture. That actually a real advertising from that time, celebrating that you could save 26 minutes in your day by throwing your plates and cutlery instead of washing them as you used to. But as we move to that transition that brought benefits to consumer, we also changed the system dramatically. The package that used to be an asset for the manufacturer became a cost of good that the manufacturer is selling to an end users, which, as we know, given that they are throwing them away after a couple of minutes sometimes, has no intent to own it in the first place. And that has created the issue in our single-use model of having packages that suddenly end up in landfill, in wild nature, or that we struggle to keep up recycling given the amount of them. So Loop is born as this concept of how do we solve for the unintended consequences of disposability, which is this amount of waste that we're generating, while maintaining the virtues and what made it the system globally, which is convenience and affordability. We created Loop as a platform for reuse that enables consumers to buy anywhere, return anywhere, as you can see in that pictures, which are real life examples of pilots that we had. You could buy your morning coffee at a McDonald's and return it into a Tesco, removing the need to associate the act of disposal from the act of purchase, and mimicking really how your garbage works today. How does this work? How do we work? We work with brand partners, manufacturers of those products, and with the retailers. We always start with the brand partners, and it all starts by designing a reusable package. You can see here we classify them in 3 different categories. The first ones are existing package, or plug and play, we call them sometimes, which are packaged mostly in glass, very transparently, which are already technically reusable, but don't have a reusable scheme to evolve in. So they are at best recycled. That's the case of the bottle that you can see here shown. It is technically reusable, but doesn't have a reusable scheme in most of the countries. So it is recycled at best. The second is a stock catalog. So those are products off the shelf packages that can be used by any company, which are pre-approved from the Loop side in terms of handling the storage and the cleaning of it. So it saves time for any brands that is joining, and can obviously personalize it how they to their brand name, etc. And the third category is what we call custom. This is where you have R&D development built into it. sometimes up to 2 years, and really brings packaging to the next level. The best positive point for mostly the design people we're working with, the packaging engineers, the packaging designers, is that certainly when you design to have an asset versus a cost of good, you're moving the conversation out of cost savings and how cheap can I make it into investing into a vehicle that's going to drive your brand equity, and that's going to also enable you to answer unmet consumer needs. We heard from Pippa before, like she was talking about the shelf life of the product. If you design the package correctly, you might increase the shelf life. So yes, you're spending a little bit more, but divided by the number of usage, it is going to give you a benefit. And you can see here the type of examples of products that we have around the platform. I don't want to put too many pictures. I know there is a limited number of time. Loop is also, as we heard previously, we are material agnostic. So it's not about plastic is bad, everything else is great, and let's move everything into metal, alloy, and glass. We believe single use is the issue. So as long as a package can be reusable on a reasonable usage up to 10 times, any product, any material is allowed on the platform, and we do work with plastic, which are durable plastic. The second step of this transition is to enable the distribution of the product. So this is where we're working with retailers across the globe, from Asia to Europe and now to the US. And we're actually launching today a partnership with Walmart in the US to really distribute and grant availability to everyday consumers to the product. And you can see here a couple of examples on how it looks like on shelf. So on the left, you have the Carrefour launch display. On the right, you have the Kroger launch display. You will notice the similarity. So we're trying to give cues to consumers in order to drive this new way of consumption. And you can see how it looks like when it gets integrated into a bigger shelf. We're working with modern way of returning, if I can call it like this. So we are using, as probably the generation before us knew, like a deposit reimbursement at the cashier, but sometimes it's also cumbersome for some of the retailers to have to handle all this money, these transactions on sometimes very low amount. So we also created an application that works on your phone, as you can see here in the picture. So there is no time taken from anyone. The consumer just scans the product, drops it into the collection point, and walks away. And I was talking about across the globe. You can see here in Asia, again, a very similar look, tone, and feel. So the system is actually really global, but also adapts to local reality. We've talked about package goods, so that would go across category. We also worked on the QSR field, and again, you can see here similar way of returning similar assets, even if completely customized to our clients' need at this stage. But again, if a consumer has seen one collection point and sees this one, it will all the cues will be there that to enable the buy anywhere, return anywhere. And that's how you can see it. The act of return is the same across every single drop points, which again drives the ecosystem. From creating all of this, the toughest nut to crack, if I can call it like this, has been how do we drive also industrialize cleaning and also start defining through the work that we've done with all of our partners, both the technical and operational partners, as well as our brand partners. First, what are the standards in the different category, and delivered actions that enable us to clean them. After almost 4 years, so Loop has been announced in 2019 at the World Economic Forum as Davos, and has launched 6 months later, so mid of 2019. We are now reaching 2023. We're very happy with the learnings that we're seeing. The first thing is we're looking at consumers, and the learnings repeat themselves country after country, markets after markets, and also independent research after independent research. So we've done our own Loop research, but we're also working with our partners. You can imagine all of the brands in this area also wants to have their own research. So we see a proposition that's extremely relevant for consumers in terms of meaningful waste reduction, where I have me as an individual an impact direct that I can measure, no polar bear effect. A system that's extremely convenient, and that's what consumers want to see. It's grab and go, just like I'm grabbing my single-use bottle today. There is no niche, so it's not about the eco-consumers. I know we talked about it in the previous presentation in terms of how we need to be appealing to a wide audience. We see this, whether it's from the concept at the early days, but also now in stores, and we have proven sales results, which are really important, obviously, for both of our partners, whether they are the distributors or the brands. You can see here we have real people, some people that are now this slide is aging, so the numbers are getting above the 500, but it is an active system that's functioning, where consumers are purchasing, repeating, and returning at very high rate. And as I was talking, it's a validated system. We have a system that is in place today across 3 continents, and that works, that have products that are being cleaned and refilled and put back on the shelf. You can see here, and that will be my last slide, and then I'm happy to take questions if there are any. So you can see where is Loop present today, and as many of the platform in that spheres, we're obviously looking at expanding the footprint in order to increase the impact that we're having. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Clémence. That was very inspiring and great to see real life examples. And as you say, really the paradigm is around convenience and accessibility, like trying to create those 2 elements, but associated to the reusable and returnable packaging, rather than what we are normally used to have them associated with, that is the single-use packaging that we normally use. So, and it's nice to see also the effort that you are doing around the industrial washing, and to make sure that they are also that perception that perhaps they are not very hygienic to reuse things that other people have been using. So there is a lot of thinking that goes into that. And we have some questions in the chat. I know that I'm conscious of the time, and I hope that people can stay with us, but I would like to take a few questions before we move to Elena again. And now I think the technical issue with the audio has been resolved, but let me ask a few questions that have come through. One is for Pippa. Pippa, if you don't mind putting back your camera as well. While she's doing that, let me ask for Clémence. So a question from Brian, Clémence, has come through, and it's, well, first of all, he thanks you very much for sharing this very important information, and he would like to know how, if you have encountered any major LCA modeling or data quality, for example, data representativeness and methodological issues from the meta-analysis of packaging through the LCA studies.
Yes, so Unfortunately, Brian, I am not an engineer on an LCA or an LCA expert. I do know, so on the Loop side, we're obviously working and following LCA's guidance as any business. We do have an LCA of our own, which has been third-party verified. Which tells you that in general, reusable packaging will be better for the environment between 3 and 4 usage. That's what we're seeing. But as I'm sure Pippa, who will know much more than I do, will say, it's not a silver bullet reuse. And depending on the assumption, your starting point and where you end up, then that will not work without the right hypothesis and validated in market. I also know that our partners are running their own LCA, so I can't disclose here the results. But broadly, all of the brands that are joining Loop are doing this work and are concluding that for their business, under the right assumption, reuse is a viable alternative from an LCA standpoint.
Thank you. And I don't know whether, Pippa, you would like to add anything to that in terms of maybe challenges in terms of the data quality while you were reviewing the LCA studies?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of as I said, it's a meta-analysis. So we obviously, you're only as good as the studies that we're reviewing. So I think we only included studies where we felt I didn't go through our criteria for selection. So we had a lot of studies. We only looked at 33 that we believed were good, reputable studies. Importantly, they all needed to be at a sufficient depth so that we could understand what they'd done. So they had to be published in full. And there was also a requirement that any study had been peer reviewed. So but that was why we started with such a wide group of literature and ended up just with 33 studies. So we kind of ensured that those that we looked at were, of good quality. But then, within any LCA, there's always data quality issues and uncertainty. I think that the biggest data quality issues within the studies or variability is around how they model the end of life. So that would be always a place where there's, what they assumed, recycling, how they modeled it, that is an area of uncertainty or leads to high variability between studies.
Thank you, Pippa. And very well, this leads me to another question that we received around uncertainty. Duago would like to know, so it starts setting the scene by saying that reusable packaging is environmentally friendlier, were reused a number of times. And Clémence mentioned this in terms of possible average to reach a break-even point. But how did our meta-analysis account for the uncertainty associated with the inability to reuse packaging materials as many times as they are designed to be reused?
Yeah, that's certainly a challenge. As you pointed out earlier, what we've done is to try and, because LCA findings often are, well, if they're reused enough, or if they are recycled after use, that kind of aspect. We did our findings, we tried to break it into the context so that those tables that I showed, we've actually broken it into a recommendation when it's reused enough times. So when a consumer is willing and to actually use a reusable packaging system correctly, then in that context, it is the right solution. In a solution where a consumer isn't going to use it correctly, and it's going to be used insufficient times, then it's not the preferred option. Then a single-use package that's recycled after use would be a better alternative than a reusable package that's only used once. Because a reusable, as the beautiful examples in Clémence's presentation, a lot of aluminium goes into that beautiful bottle. The last thing you want to do is use that once. Then that has a really high impact. It's only a good option when it's used many, many times. So yeah, the way we handled it was to try and make it those discrete contexts, because otherwise we're always saying if, and it kind of dilutes the message.
Thank you. And going back, let me just ask this one more question that came through from Andrew. And of course, we are talking about breaking a way of thinking that somehow is quite recent if you think about it in terms of time. But so it doesn't date back to 50 years. It's quite recent, but yet it has permeates our life on a daily basis, this choice of single-use plastic and our behavior. So Andrew says there are over 50,000 packaging types in a major supermarket. How many of these do you think that can be replaced with the loop system? Clemence, I don't know whether you have a readily available answer for that, but I thought it was quite an interesting question.
It is very interesting, and actually, I mean, I have the answer to how many can technically be replaced on a pre-filled systems that functions exactly like single use. Any package could technically be reusable. So you don't have, like you might have in other system which use a different distribution method, any issue on regulatory or consumer use. Like, for example, not everything can be concentrated. You have toxic products, or, you know, like paint or insect repellent or things like this that you would struggle to concentrate. Same thing if you have to go on the bulk side of distribution. Carbonated beverage in the bulk distribution is tricky. But on pre-fill reuse, which is what Loop is offering, technically everything can be put in a package. So the answer to this question could be the 50,000 item could be in a reusable bottle. What is going to make the difference, as we were talking, is what's the starting point? So where is your single-use packaging, and what is the durable packaging you are going to bring it to? And that will also give you the guidance from an LCA standpoint and from a business model standpoint, which still rules most of the business decisions there. So if you take a mesh potato bag and try to put it in a very heavy stainless steel, that probably won't work in both the LCA and the business. So the work is not on if it's feasible, it's how it's feasible.
Brilliant. Many thanks. And thank you to both of you for taking these questions. Before concluding, I would like to also invite all the other presenters to come on screen. If you're still connected, please. So I really hope that what we hope that you have taken from today's launch, for all the participants that have joined us, very many thanks. Hope you are from this workshop you have understood better what is happening on the global scene around plastic and what is UNEP approach to food system. I hope that through the intervention of Pippa, of Elena, and of Elle, you've gathered a bit what are our recommendations from the experts on the scope and approach that we have used in the study, and what are the key insights and recommendations that we put forth in terms of supermarket food packaging, so when single-use, when reusables. And we stay at your disposal if you have any questions after this event. As we mentioned, the recording will be shared in a week or so time together with the presentations that have been shared today, and they will be made available also on the Life Cycle Initiative website. And I also hope that you have been inspired by some of the good examples that Clemence has shared on the loop system. So thank you so much for having connected with us. And I want to thank Pippa, Elle, Federica, Clemence that had to disconnect, and Elena for joining us today. And of course, all the back end system, the technician and the food LCA for hosting us, and Silvana from our UNEP team that has been fundamental, and Miriam as well, that have been supporting this event from happening. Before we end, there is one more question that maybe we should take. Should an LCA differentiate between the responsibility from producer for marine litter and the burden of society to manage or clean it up? Should the LCA assign a value to producer for the whole process? So I guess this is a question for Elena. Since we didn't have any question for you, Elena, before I officially close the event, let me pass it to you.
Thank you. Well, in life cycle assessment, we actually do not assign I think we need to meet me right there. So we don't assign really responsibilities to particular people. We're just looking at the emissions and how they end up in the environment. So it is tricky at this point. There could be some, I think, can you mute over this?
We can hear you well.
Yeah, you can hear me well. Okay, I see. I hear myself with echo. So in the end, at the end of the day, this is not something we really take into account in life cycle assessment at this point.
Okay, thank you so much. Again, a big thanks for all the participants that have stayed so much beyond the time, and for those that have connected from time zones that are a bit uncomfortable. And big thanks to all the speakers, to our authors, and thank you, Pippa, for having named all of them earlier. And I wish you all a good rest of the day. Thank you very much, everyone.